There are a lot of different ways that people learn, and we're going to look at today one of the simplest ways of learning. It's also one of the most powerful, but it's also one of the most overlooked. And before we start, I'd like you to just engage in a little thought experiment with me for a second. I'd like you to imagine that you've got a football and you put that football on the ground in front of you. And then imagine that you've got a board, a piece of wood that's maybe 3 foot long and a foot across. And imagine that you're balancing that on top of the board. And then I want you to imagine what it would be like if you were to stand on that board and tip it and balance so that both ends of the board are off the floor. Now, you know that this is possible. You've probably seen people doing similar things in a circus or on TV. But if you've not done anything like it before, you're probably going to find it quite difficult because you need to balance and use your muscles in a way that you're not used to. But if you practiced it, you'd probably be able to do it. Now, one of the most difficult things that we ever learn to do as a human being is learning to walk. And just imagine for a moment what that's like for a child. The first thing they've got to do is learn to stand up. And what's it like trying to balance on top of that board? That's probably what it's like for children learning to stand up for the first time. In actual fact, it's harder for children because you've already got some sense of balance. You already have some use of your muscles, and children are learning all of this for the first time. And then once they manage to stand up, they've got to get this whole walking thing down. And they probably have this idea in their head. They see other people walking, that looks like a pretty useful thing, and they want to do it. So what do? They copy people. Because once they've been able to stand up and they've got some balance, now they've got to be able to do that on one foot temporarily while they put the other foot in front of the other. And how far do they put that foot in front of the other? Should it be directly in front of it, slightly to the side? If it's to the side, how much? What sort of size of steps should they be taking so that they don't fall over? And children learn this by modelling other people, by copying them. And if you're ever around children at the stage where they're learning to walk, just watch what they do, because they don't just look at you, they're studying exactly what you're doing, and they're figuring out how they can do that for themselves. And they're doing that at a level that's below the level of language, because they don't have the power of language at this point. So that's how children use modelling. They study and then they copy what they see. So how can we use that as adults? And I'm going to use an example of a way that I used this a few days ago, and it was extremely useful for me, and you might get some ideas of how you can employ this in your life. Now, the scenario was that I was building a new website and I needed to write some copy for it. It's not something that I find particularly easy. If I'm not careful, I tend to overthink it. Am I using the correct words in the right order? Is the sentence structure right? Should that paragraph be shorter or longer? And what I'm trying to do is take a complex idea from inside my head and implant it into somebody else's head, and doing that through the medium of language. And somewhere in the middle, I tend to overthink that language and tie myself up in knots. So what I did, I asked myself the question, who would be really good at doing this? And the first person that came into my head was this guy here. His name is Richard Bandler. You may or may not have heard of him. He was one of the originators of NLP. And the next question I asked myself is, what is it about Richard Bandler that would make him really good at doing what I'm about to do? And two things came into my head. One is, I find him extremely charismatic and I find him very engaging. That's whether he's talking in person or whether he's writing books. I find just his communication style very engaging. But the thing that was most interesting to me was that he seems to have this knack of taking a really complex idea and communicating it in a very simple way that makes it easy for people to understand. So what I need to do at this point is now pick one of those aspects and copy it. Now, it's very important here that I am not trying to be like Richard Bandler. He's very good at being Richard Bandler. I'd probably be terrible at it, but I'm quite good at being myself. But being myself with that aspect of being able to explain things very clearly would be really useful to me. So in my head, I keep the idea of Richard Bandler and keep the idea of him being very good at explaining things in a simple way. And then I start writing. When I started doing that, what I noticed very quickly is that I could hear his voice in my head. Now I have a very auditory memory. I'm good at hearing voices, but I was able to hear the words as I was typing them in his voice. I wasn't really focusing on doing this. This is something that I've now got in the back of my mind, but as I'm typing, I'm hearing his voice. And what I found is that I got into this flow state and it was really easy for me to write, and I wasn't analysing what I was writing. It was just coming straight from me and straight onto the page. I finished what I was writing in about 20 minutes, and I'm not exaggerating if I say that there are times when this could take me a day and I wouldn't be happy with the result. When I got to the end of it, it turned out, after a couple of short edits, I was really happy with what I'd written. I then put it aside for a couple of days and came back to it, because what I wanted to check out was, have I copied Richard Bandler's style? Does it sound like Richard Bandler's written this, or does it sound like my style? And when I went back to it, firstly, I was very pleasantly surprised at what I'd written, how clearly that I'd expressed my idea. But the second thing was, it sounded like me, it didn't sound like him. One more example. Let's say that I'm playing football and I want to play better than I normally do. So my first question is, who would be really good at playing football? And then the second question is, what is one aspect of them that would make them really good at it? Because the important thing is here, we're not trying to model a person, we're not trying to copy a person, we're trying to copy one specific characteristic or skill that they have. Now with that footballer, it might be they've got a great skill at passing the ball with pinpoint accuracy to their teammate. So what's going to happen then? I focus on that, but focus on it in the back of my mind. I'm not actively thinking about it all of the time. And what's going to happen, I'm going to play my normal game, but at the same time, I've got this idea of passing the ball with pinpoint accuracy. And because I'm focusing on it, I'm going to do it a little bit better than I normally do. And as a result, I will probably play better. You can apply this to anything. What if I was going to a party and I'm not very comfortable at parties, which by the way is true, it's not a natural environment for me, but I know some people who it absolutely is their natural environment. They're really good at socialising at parties. What if I was to make that person my expert and to ask myself, what is one characteristic that they have that makes them really good in that situation, and to keep that in the back of my mind. And remember, I'm not trying to copy that person, I'm trying to copy one little characteristic that they have. Now, what about if you were to take this to extremes? I'm not suggesting that you should, but think of the possibilities of this. What if there's different areas in your life, things that you do on a regular basis? What if you had an expert for each of those areas? And for each of those experts, you had a characteristic that you want to model when you're performing that activity. Think of the possibilities of that. And you could have more than one expert in an area, because different experts have got different characteristics that they bring that enhance their performance. Next time we're going to look at the most important person who you can ever model. I wonder what ideas you can come up with of who that might be. Meanwhile, take this away, play with it, and see what kind of results you get with it, and I'll see you soon.